It's of your list. I mean, what comes up is this tension between get out there and do it systematically and with scale, and the policy perspective. And it's sort of like, what can you do from your list without wide-scale policy change? I mean, can you marshal the momentum in an institutional sense that matches Francis's momentum?
Well, I'm certainly giving it a red-hot go. And one of the things that I've in my 5-year strategic plan for the university, which aims to grow the university, because as you can see, there's huge opportunities out there in this world in terms of demand for education. So any educational institution who doesn't think they can grow would be, I think, very defeatist in this environment. So the question is, how do we grow? And in my strategic plan, I say, well, there are two things. We've got our conventional courses operating in a regulated environment, accredited under the conventional system, funded in the conventional way, and so on. And we've got to make that offer very competitive against our competitors. So we've got an improvement program for our kind of core business. But I've set up a part of the organisation which is about new markets, new models, to explore opportunities, usually partnerships, to do things in a different way, to do things faster, to do things digitally, to do things collaboratively with industry. Not necessarily with conventional funding and conventional accreditation, although sometimes that is possible. So you need to be an ambidextrous organisation if you are in that traditional sector. I think that concept of an ambidextrous organisation is quite a powerful one. So that's what I'm trying to be at the moment. Yeah.
Yes, please. And there's a mic coming around, thanks.
Thank you. The Mitchell Institute had a report late last year showing that 25% of students were not meeting benchmarks at entry to school, mid-school, year 12 and age 24. Not necessarily the same 25, but really distressing numbers. Is there any evidence that the approach that you were advocating, where you're encouraging cultural literacy and creativity and so on, will actually help capture and re-engage that losing 25%?
Look, that's very much at the heart of the research agenda of the Mitchell Institute. So they are engaged in that investigation themselves, and there is no doubt that engaged learners can learn and disengaged learners struggle. So the evidence of that is quite clear. So the main issue is, how do you get a greater proportion of learners to be engaged? And I think there's increasing evidence that the traditional model, where we teach what you need to learn, so to speak, that somebody on high deems to be what's needed, is kind of failing to engage students. And so that is the research agenda and the policy agenda the Mitchell Institute is focused on. And so there's no doubt we can certainly point to examples where this is working. This is always the case, of course, when you're trying to transform a whole system. You can always demonstrate in particular places that you've got a recipe that works. Then the question is how to scale it up. But I know a number of schools in Melbourne where basically the curriculum is driven by what interests the kids. And then their literacy and numeracy improves because it needs to solve the problems and the issues that they're interested in using the resources that they need to solve their particular problem. So there's no doubt that we can see that working. The challenge, which the policy challenge, is how do you scale that up across a whole system? And it needs, I think, some workforce reform, rather than, one teacher to 20 kids teaching a standard curriculum. You need teamwork, you need this individualised approach. So I think the evidence is growing stronger and stronger that this approach will work. It's now the issue of how can we demonstrate how to do it more systematically. And that's where the idea of a learning precinct, for example, rather than just proving in one school that you can do it, if you can do it in a whole precinct where there's several secondary schools, a large number of primary schools, and a TAFE and a higher density, all devoted to bringing the resources to each kid that they need and to engage in an engaged way, that I think scaling it up from the individual case to a broader precinct, then you can go from there. Yeah.
Frances, do you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think it's important to look also where there has been great success. So if you look at places like Finland, they have a very different approach. They don't assess students, they don't have sort of national standards or measures until they're 12 years old. And actually they say between, basically when they start school at 7, not 5, until 12, that there's lots of time there to develop self and actually the creative and collaborative type skill sets. The other thing they have there, which is extraordinary, is all teachers hold a master's qualification, and there is such demand. Only 1 in every 100 applicants gets to become a teacher. So the quality of teaching is huge, and I think that what we do know in education at any level, the quality of teacher is going to be the number one decider on how much that student learns. And I think that here in New Zealand, we probably can't say that all teachers should be teachers and all faculty should not be teaching. And so that's part of our challenge, is we haven't rewarded and sort of put the rock star mentality on teachers and valued them in the way we possibly could have. But I think we've become obsessed with measuring. Everything seems to have a measure against it now. And if you're talking to teachers, as we do every day, they spend half their time almost trying to capture what a student should be doing at that age and that point of time, and rather than letting them actually learn.
Yes, please.
I suppose my question is along a similar theme. You talk about the new paradigm and discovering what children need to learn and how they need to learn. A number of years ago, 6 or 8 years ago, Tasmania tried to restructure its curriculum into what it called essential learnings, thinking, discovering, exploring. It failed dismally because it was crushed by this getting back to basics rhetoric. We just need to learn how to count, we need to learn how to spell. This morning, the NAPLAN results come out, and that's the national discussion. Can people spell? Can people art? People numerate? How do we move a public discussion on education beyond do you know how to spell or write or read to do we know how to think, do we know how to discover this new paradigm? How do we get it out of academia and into a public discourse?
No, good question, because that was a decade ago, as you say, and part of what Peter and Frances were saying is things are changing rapidly. So the challenge is, can you redo that in a different way, and is the time sufficiently sort of mature now? I mean, so it's a matter of timing as well as argument.
What I find is that if you go to communities where education has not served them well, they have much more robust conversations about what education should provide, and it's not about those measures of numeracy literacy as being the only measures. And so if you talk to those communities, you actually get a lot better conversations, and parents are much more open to the idea that education has a different purpose now. If you go to the traditionally sort of the grammar type environments and the traditional, well-served education environments, education of the past served them very well in a different way. The rote learning, the past exams, become the A student was the measure of success, and they have probably gone on to great jobs because of it. That's a very hard measure to move, because those very people have got the biggest say. They're often sitting in boards, and they're sitting in policy teams, and they're sitting within government. And so they look back and say, well, that education was a great system, so why are we changing it? So you have this conflict between those who served well and those who didn't. And I think we just have to get the conversation much more robustly on the table with everyone and understand what exactly will our kids do if we just continue down this pathway, because those jobs aren't going to be there. And for the first time, we're seeing right now that I spend more time talking to doctors and lawyers and accountants who are seeing the massive drop-off in their need for the future than I am talking to other sectors. And they're starting to sort of go, what do we do? Because data is changing everything. And so those conversations we're sort of reframing, but they're difficult conversations to have.
Yeah, look, I agree completely with that. And look, I think the conversation will change over the next few years, and it's already starting to change. Policy's lagging behind, unfortunately, because the back to basics model still seems to have some traction in political circles. But But look, demonstration projects that show the success of the new paradigm are undoubtedly required. And I think you're right, Francis, that you've got to choose strategically where to do them. If you try and replace traditional grammar school that gets high NAPLAN scores and high ATAR scores and so on with this, then you're going to face more resistance than in areas where success has not been as strong in the traditional model. And running university in the west of Melbourne, where there's a lot of opportunity for us to drive greater success amongst our school students using the new paradigm, because there's a lot of disengagement from school in that region, and we're already having some success in working with the schools to get kids motivated for tertiary study and to get focused on actually getting the skills they need to be successful in life, and I think that will gradually gain sway in future years.
It might be that it is in the higher education sector, in institutions like Peter, that make the first breakthrough, just because of the rigidity and the strong expectations of the conventional up to, say, Year 9, which is the NAPLAN effect. And it might be that, like, post-compulsory secondary schooling and higher education, with greater authority in local areas, can actually pull off some innovation, and the schooling system might follow. Because a lot of us, and I think a lot of people in the room, have had to go with the school sector. And as you say, then, you know, they look at the news this morning and how the ABC represents good schools. There's one Victorian school they're profiling, and it's orthodoxy they're profiling. And it's the courage of the school to get back to orthodoxy and judged by the NAPLAN. And that's, you know, in the last 6 months. So it's a tough area. Steve, bit of cold calling. Steve said you were at federal department at one point. What's your sort of take on this? Would you, as a policy maker, sort of duck your head and say, go trial some things, or can you see policy angles?
No, I mean, I've been kind of sitting here scratching my head, because we were engaged in that debate right at the very beginning, and it was never about teaching to the test. You know, the whole point about the literacy and numeracy debate was about enabling skills which would put kids in the position where they could become self-directed learners, and to develop those kind of inquisitive skills that would in fact make them job ready for the world of the future.
Something slipped away.
It was never, it was never intended to be this, you know, kind of crazy world that it's turned out to be. So there was something in the translation that we all missed, Peter, and I'm buggered if I know what it was.
I think it's also worth saying that it's only 2,000 days before the 12-year-olds are going to hit higher education. You know, in 2,000 days, you're going to suddenly have students who are just going to go, well, this is not for me. I think if nothing else changes, that will be the day where you suddenly open the door and say, why is no one walking in? So it's a challenge. In some ways, our higher education system has got a little bit of a window. They've got that window ahead of them in the next 5.5 years. But what about, you know, high schools right now are in the worst position. Secondary schools have got them arriving this year and are not sure what to do with them, you know, because they're just completely different. So sometimes the change will come from the students themselves saying, why am I here?
Yeah, but I wonder whether part of it really is around the framing of the role of the teacher. There's a chance that for some teachers at least, the notion that education is really about technology is very disempowering. And to me, you know, the role of the teacher has always been about the intelligent agent who could be the link between the child with their particular bundle of, you know, skills and attributes and interests and whatever, and an environment that was meant to be teaching them a whole bunch of enabling skills and then giving them the opportunity to do kind of various other stuff. And I kind of wonder whether we've turned it into a compliance activity rather than a vocation.
Just on that, actually, I think what we've seen with having such large numbers of students is that where the biggest issues are is where teachers have gone out or schools have gone and purchased a lot of technology. You know, class sets of iPads or laptops without any professional development. And actually, technology should be invisible in a class. It should never be the driver or the end point. It's just a tool in the class. And a lot of teachers got very intimidated and started doing things like apps and doing things which had no educational value and no cognitive process behind it. And so where we've seen schools going very slowly and slowly bringing in technology and utilising and taking a sort of a digital pedagogical approach to it, it's much better.
But yeah, look, good teaching in the old paradigm was hard enough, but in the new paradigm it's harder because this exploiting the talents of every individual to the full, of all of their capabilities and all their intelligence and so on, for any single teacher is much too hard. So you know, when I was Secretary of the Department of Education in Victoria, we had a very strong focus around improving quality of teaching. I think that was the right thing to do, but I think it was still a little bit in the old paradigm that there was a tendency to think that a teacher in front of 30 kids could solve all of their problems. Now we were moving to team teaching, but even team teaching, you know, it's got to be a much bigger concept. That's why I'm now talking about, you know, a precinct, right, where you have a whole lot of specialists who are good at particular aspects of teaching. It might be literacy or numeracy, it might be physical education. Every kid needs physical education, you know, twice a week. You can't have every teacher in every class capable of doing that or being experts in it. So you need a much more sophisticated kind of view of the workforce and a much stronger career profile of teachers, and using paraprofessionals and non-teachers in this way of bringing the resource to every individual that doesn't rely on a brilliant teacher for every student, because you'll never create a brilliant teaching workforce. It's just an unachievable goal.
Please, yeah. Sprinting there.
Sorry, just to add another wrinkle on your unachievable goal. The sort of the vision that you're putting forward probably really works in a sort of metropolitan, middle class environment. How do you see it working in, dealing with, you know, rural New South Wales or rural Victoria?
Yeah,
the resources just aren't, you know, it's hard enough to get the resources there at the moment for traditional teaching.
I agree that is a big challenge. You still will need collaboration, and of course the digital materials do empower local schools more than they were previously empowered, but even that's probably not enough. So even though there are vast distances involved, you will need to use networks, and you'll need to draw on whatever skills and capabilities you can in a, you know, that is a big problem. I agree. You know, some of the kids, some of the schools in those regional areas are tiny. That's a big project.
Are there innovations underway that you know about?
I mean, there are digital innovations, but I guess the question is, there are kids out there who are already being left behind.
Yeah.
How do you prevent them being left behind even more?
Yeah.
As you know, the metropolitan
Yeah.
areas get those.
Yeah.
And it sort of comes to some of the things you're saying, Francis, about what's happening, you know, developing countries. But how can we take that and you know, we kind of don't. We tend not to kind of learn from developing countries, but in a way we kind of need to.
We do.
Yeah.
A leapfrog, that's right.
Yeah, I mean, it very much is a leapfrog. And in saying that small, with the Mind Lab, we've actually gone out to our smallest town is a place called Ruatoria, and I think it has like 800 people live there. And we've got 82% of all teachers in the whole region, in that town, on our program. You know, they were just so excited by the fact that we made the effort to go out there. One of my faculty drives 3 hours each way to run that class, just because we believe it has to be done, and it's one of the most impoverished areas of the country. So I think that it does take, again, an outside-the-box system. And we have a lot of philanthropic money behind us, supporting us, as well as, you know, so we have good, willing people who are saying, look, let's make it accessible, and we'll be able to fund it. So it's not coming from the government. The actual money is coming from other sources, which is interesting.
Other questions? We've still got a bit of time. Peter, what have you learned from today? You know, it's because I know you approaching this in a very open-minded way.
Oh, look, I think that, you know, I've just developed a new strategic plan for my university and did a lot of environmental scanning to figure out what kind of world we're in. And this digital disruption and all sorts of other disruptions loom large in trying to think, how do you make your organisation competitive, particularly in a regulated world, a unionised world, and all of those things. And if you're a pessimist, you might, you know, you could easily see a lot of gloom and doom in the environment, you know, because of the challenges. I tend to be an optimist personally, so I think that disposition is helpful in this environment. And you know, there are huge opportunities out there, But there's no doubt there's a lot of change needs to be fostered in an institutional environment which tends to be conservative, and universities are these ancient beasts. And I managed to attract an entrepreneur in residence, one of my slides, who had managed to turn Lonely Planet from a book company to a digital company, and he said that was a big enough challenge. And the book is a bit, but he thought universities were going to be just too hard. But he's another optimist, and he's being very disruptive, and having a big impact. And the students love him, and they're doing these startups and these hackathons and so on. And it's now beginning to infiltrate into the curriculum. Look, we have got a lot of resource in the traditional system. It's just a matter of rechanneling it and energising it, and energising our workforces and collaborating with other disruptors. So, I am an optimist, but, the speed with which it could happen, there is huge uncertainty out there. It could be cataclysmic. You'd have to accept it could be cataclysmic for traditional organisations, but on the other hand, there are big opportunities. So I think the variance of potential outcomes is huge. All you can do is try and be as strategic and progressive as you can in making best of all the opportunities, and we'll see what happens.
Frances, what comes to mind just from even engaging in the discussion?
So maybe just on that speed topic. So one of the things is that Moore's law was put in place basically in the 60s, was based upon the computer processing, the doubling of processing every 18 months and the halving of cost. And it was really very specifically around computer processing. And in more recent times, because everything we do is now based upon a computer process. It doesn't matter if you're a medicine, or if you're a chef, or you're a truck driver. Everything, the basis is technology. So basically now we're looking at energy on Moore's law. We're looking at things like automation and robotics following Moore's law, which is this doubling effect. I mean, there is an exception. I mean, genome sequencing is on it. Literally everything, which is this doubling. And so I was very fortunate to spend some time at the Singularity University earlier this year, and we talked a lot about this, that every industry can follow it, and so this doubling. And if you look at it this way, if I took 30 linear steps, which is the way we normally have business, each year we incrementally step in front of each, and we sort of move things ahead. If I walked out the door here, I would end up at the other end of this building. If I took 30 exponential steps under Moore's law, this doubling effect, I would go 26 times around the Earth. And what we need to understand is the halving effect. So if you had a full lake today, and that was the top of Moore's law, the year before it's half empty, I believe we're in the half empty stage right now, that literally we're in the shadow of a tsunami, and the effect of this technology and the joining up and the convergence of technology is the impact is going to come swift, and it's going to be very soon. And so, we just don't have time anymore.
Steve. Whoa.
I was provoked by a question to Peter, kind of what did you learn today? And I think what I've learned is that ABC for Kids is a digital disruptor. And the reason for that is that, like a few people in this room, I've got grandkids, and by about 18 months, they can turn on the iPad, they can select the program that they want, and, da-da-da-da-da-da. By the time they get to school, they'll be bored out of their brains.
Well, unless the schools have changed by the time they get there, of course.
Well, it's only 2 years away, mate.
Yeah, I know.
Well, primary school, I think you'll find it pretty good.
Yeah.
And I think that this back to primary schools. You think primary schools?
I think
are
primary
ahead of the
schools
game?
generally are pretty good. Yeah.
They're getting there.
Yeah.
So.
But hang on, but they're the ones that we're complaining about with that.
Well, no, I think in terms of providing different ways of learning, I think there's a lot more variety within a classroom. I don't know here. I don't know the system here, but certainly in New Zealand. Yeah, I think that because they're feeling the pinch already, they've got those kids in their classroom, and they're trying to decipher it on the fly.
So, yes, please. Yeah. It's coming.
Other way.
Yeah, hi, I'm Richard, and I work in Western Australia, mainly with rurally remote Aboriginal communities. Really interesting conversation, and certainly the institutional nature of schooling currently is not working for remote communities particularly. I'm just interested in if a tsunami is coming, it's a digital tsunami, then a lot of Aboriginal communities are a fair way back in relation to use of technology. And I'm just be really interested in your views as to whether we should intervene or support or introduce that connection that's obviously going to be vital for the new economy.
So I think that there is more than sufficient evidence. If you provide a laptop to a child and connectivity, then they'll work it out. That it's very intuitive. It's the computer on the wall in the Indian slums. From the very beginning, we've seen that model work in lots of locations. That the kids are naturally inclined and interested. So you do need to provide access, but I don't think you necessarily have to teach them how to use it. I think that could be almost the dangerous point. Teachers teach things like Photoshop or PowerPoint or Excel. Is killing our children's. So sometimes it's getting out of the way is a better option, but just making sure they have those devices.
That's a pretty good policy position. Anyone else want to comment on their stance with respect to the tsunami? Any other more final comment, perhaps, Frances, and we can wrap up? Anything?
Look, I just think that anyone can be a change agent. I think that you just need to actually find a collective of like-minded people. And I see it time and time again where communities come to us and say, look, we want to make change. And they're normally cross groups. They're from educators, from parents and grandparents. But you do need to get a voice out there and make a stand. I think that the worst thing you could do right now is have no voice. And that lead change and just find people who are going to be on the journey with you. And if I find someone who's an obstacle, I just go around them. And that's really the only way, because there are some people who are terrified of this and they will just hold their ground no matter what.
Yeah, I think my comment would be that the quality of education over the next decade is an absolutely critical determinant of the success of our next generation and the generation beyond. And this is both exciting and extremely challenging. And at the moment, I don't think our policy settings are up to it or really getting across the issues. So I'd encourage all of you involved in policy in some way
to
take the 8-point plan and get a dialogue going across the public sector. I mean, I'm having discussions with various bureaucrats and ministers, and I think people are listening. But it's been a bit of an unstable political environment the last few years, and these are big issues that need to be dealt with. Looking at both at the federal level, the new Minister for Education, well, he was Minister last time, and the opposition Shadow Minister look like high calibre people to me. So hopefully they can make some big breakthroughs. We've got a good Minister for Education in Victoria, so I'm hoping that that we will make some breakthroughs over the next few years. But it's absolutely critical for the future of Australia.
Well, on that positive note, join me in thanking Peter and Frances.